December 30th, Putin's palace in Valdai was attacked. These are the kinds of Russian fakes spread by Russian propaganda to disrupt negotiations.
On the night of December 28 to 29, 2025, the Kiev regime carried out a terrorist attack using 91 strike unmanned aerial vehicles. Long range, targeting the state residence of the President of the Russian Federation in the Novgorod region. Are there, let's say, any physical pieces of evidence regarding this attack on the presidential residence? And does Russia intend to present them? Maybe debris from the drones that were shot down?
I truly don't think there should be any visible evidence here if such a truly massive drone raid had actually taken place, you know.
This absolute fake was invented by the Russians in order to disrupt negotiations and avoid a ceasefire.
So from Kiev's perspective and official stance, does this truly mean that Ukraine has formally and unequivocally declared a state of war on the Russian Federation?
It can be understood that this attempt was aimed not only at eliminating our president, our supreme commander-in-chief. The calculation was simple. By eliminating Putin, we would look for a figure to replace him.
Military experts say that the main goal of the Kiev regime's provocation is an attempt to derail peace initiatives. What targets might Moscow choose for a retaliatory strike?
If we talk about a response to Ukraine's massive strike on the Russian president's residence, then of course these could be decision-making centers, Bankova Street, the Ministry of Defense buildings, the main intelligence directorate, and a number of government institutions.
The AFU struck oil refineries, railways, and ammunition depots. Russia is losing oil, fuel, and even symbols of power.
A Fipsky oil refinery.
Both the Afipsky and Kuibyshev oil refineries are burning. Russian media report dozens of hectares on fire, hundreds of firefighters and helicopters. Is this an accident or sabotage? We'll discuss the new special operations by the SBU and GUAR on Russian territory with Oleksandr Demchenko. Right now.
This is a blow to the most sensitive spot. It's a strike against his crown jewel, his place, almost said his burial site, his mega bunker in the rock. He's been building it there for years. Absolutely.
Some people say, oh, come on, nothing terrible really happened there. There's a clause in Article 19 that, in our new doctrine, defines the conditions for the use of nuclear weapons. It clearly states here that enemy actions against critically important state or military facilities, and the president's state residence falls under the category of facilities, the disabling of which would disrupt the retaliatory actions of the nuclear forces. The use or activation of codes, or as people commonly say, the nuclear briefcase. In the US, it's called the football, the briefcase with codes and systems that make this possible. This is a direct threat to NATO.
What's the key point? The key point is that Putin destroyed his own residence in advance. Bocharov Ruche, because he was afraid that this residence would be targeted. In the end, it was his palace that was hit, the one that Rotenberg, Timchenko, and all the others spent so long building. What's important is that, in fact, over the past few weeks, Putin has been receiving a very important signal, a message directed specifically at him, Vladimir Putin. The message is this: we can reach any point, the range has changed, and Ukraine is no longer actually planning to just let things slide, roll up its sleeves, and leave everything unanswered. For Kyiv, for Dnipro, for Zaporizhzhia, for Kharkiv, and for the countless Ukrainian cities that have recently, and indeed for years, been mercilessly bombed by the bloody Russian occupation forces. There will be a response, and it won't be just any response. Ukraine is demonstrating both the Flamingo and the long-range Neptune, as well as a huge number of other missiles, shells, drones, new and modernized. These are capable of covering long distances and striking at key targets and directions. As you know, Dasha, they came to Putin the other day and caused a public scandal for him in the Kremlin. Representatives of, firstly, the oligarchs, and secondly, the security forces. Honestly, they've long since merged and now represent the same party line, so to speak. The so-called collective Sechin and the so-called collective Potanin. They came to Putin and caused a scandal for him. And they said, either you give us money and restore our factories, or we stop financing your war. This is a very important signal that we literally just heard at the oligarchs forum, which was publicly announced and voiced. And this is an important signal. Why? Because it shows that Putin really doesn't have any money for the war. Putin is really facing a crisis in Russia, that things are far from calm for Putin in the political sphere, from the point of view of the political or socio-political situation inside the Russian Federation. And by and large, he basically has major problems, and the crisis in Russia is only growing. An economic crisis, a social crisis, and so on. Vladimir Putin is afraid because he's afraid he'll lose the war for Ukraine, because he's afraid that in general he won't be able to handle his own military machine, because he doesn't have any money, because he doesn't have the resources, because without help from the Chinese he won't manage. Putin, Lukashenko, Kim Jong-un, and they will be asking the Chinese Emperor Xi Jinping for permission to further escalate, intensify, and continue large-scale military actions against Ukraine. Yes or no? That's what China will tell them. And this is yet another stage, the newest stage in this war, when it will become clear and obviously what China will do, what is at stake. Either he will allow Putin to keep going, or he'll say, no, put an end to this bloody mess. Or he might tell Lukashenko, go ahead, join the war. I don't care about you, your regime, your entire entourage, or your money. Or not. Lukashenko remains untouched. He must not be touched, Vladimir. Leave him alone. He'll send Kim Jong-un, his agriculture workers, his army, or some of his so-called dogs, 12,000, 15,000, to fight against Ukraine. Or not. He'll give the North Koreans permission to keep supplying Russia with artillery shells in huge quantities. Or not. And ultimately, a lot will depend on this, including how this war will unfold further and what its nature will be going forward, and what the White House will do. Although it seems to me that Trump is in such a terrible, poor condition, as you know, even American doctors are now saying he has 6 to 8 months left, which I don't believe. Nevertheless, I'm not really sure that Donald Trump will react to anything or that there will be any tough response toward Beijing or Moscow. Because as soon as questions arise like, let's give Putin another 14 days, Putin uses those 14 days to the fullest. And we've seen this in Kiev, in the casualties among Kiev residents, we've seen it happen. And in Dnipro, in Zaporizhzhia, and in a number of other major Ukrainian cities and directions.
Sergei, regarding the strikes on Russia, look, the SBU and the armed forces of Ukraine have started actively striking Russian territory. So first of all, the night turned out to be hellish for Russia. The Ukrainian armed forces struck the Efipsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai, the Kuibyshev refinery in Samara, and reportedly in Syzran as well. All around Krasnodar, there are clouds of black smoke over the city. And it turns out that the command of Ukraine's drone forces made a statement that Russia has lost 21% of its oil refining capacity. This is the lifeblood of the Russian army. The question is, in your opinion, how much does this hurt the Russian front, and will it be able to withstand it if the strikes on the refineries continue?
It hits hard because these are issues of supply, issues of fuel, issues of delivery and logistics directly. Moreover, as I have repeatedly emphasized in our discussions, Russia is Moscow-centric. As soon as you strike a refinery or an airport or block something or block some railway or the railway tracks themselves, it directly affects Moscow and Muscovites. It has an immediate effect. Moreover, refineries are like the very needle in Koshchei's egg. That is where Vladimir Putin's death lies. That is where, in fact, his power is truly hidden. Because Putin's power and the war rest on just one thing, and that is the oil and gas revenues in the Russian budget. Before the large-scale strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces on refineries, which we've been witnessing over the past few weeks or even a month, we could observe that Russia had lost 30% of its annual budget revenue. Now just calculate what has happened in the last month or the past 3 weeks. When Ukraine simply destroyed several of the most important large-scale city-forming plants, those very oil refineries. Look at what's happening along the Moscow-Rostov-Krasnodar highway, where there are a huge number of trucks. This line, this convoy, isn't getting any shorter. In fact, it's only growing. Day after day, a huge number of trucks, a huge number of cars, all of them searching for at least 10 liters of fuel. Just look at what's happening. What are they going to do about all this? And on every liter of gasoline, 60% is excise tax, which goes to the state as revenue. Putin doesn't have that. That's why Budanov and Malyuk are right when they say that soon Putin won't have enough money for the war, and then he'll have to start squeezing his own citizens for it. The question is, are Russians ready to be squeezed like that? I'm sure that those who took 1 trillion rubles in the last week and a half, or almost 2 weeks, are definitely not ready for Putin to squeeze them. The question is, but what, in principle, are Russians or the Russian elite actually ready for? You know, for example, that General Gerasimov recently stated that the war is ongoing. A Telegram channel run by an intelligence officer affiliated with the Russian security forces, as far as I understand, stated that Gerasimov is basically afraid of the war ending because he's worried they'll come for him. They'll take him by the arms, arrest him, and shoot him. Or they'll execute him or dispose of him, or they just don't know what they'll do with him at all. This is a very telling story. He's afraid. He understands perfectly well that Putin will sick everyone on him, that he'll be made the scapegoat. Him and his generals, his inner circle. One of his deputies is already in prison. He was given a huge number of years in prison. A deputy, Gerasimov's deputy is in prison. He's already been removed. That's why we're talking about that the generals are afraid. Gerasimov is afraid. He understands this perfectly well. But the question is something else. Will they organize an attempt at an uprising, a coup, a revolt? Will they send tanks to Moscow, the army to Moscow? Will they create a new Prigozhin? Will they release Gherkin from prison? And will they send him off with his gang, with some thugs, ex-cons, and so on, those who are fighting for him on the front lines? Will they send this whole gang to conquer Moscow? And Yevgeny Prigozhin, Operation 2.0, will all of that happen again? I'm not sure, but anything is possible in the Russian Federation. In fact, throughout Russian history, anything has always been possible. Just recently, American channels and journalists were absolutely stunned by how Prigozhin marched through Rostov towards Moscow, almost made it, and then suddenly stopped. It's only been about 2 years since then. What will happen now is unknown, but the scenario could very well repeat itself. It could. And even though I only give it a small chance, I still give it a chance. Because either Putin will devour the generals or the generals will devour Putin. And the fact is, the Ukrainian armed forces are striking strategic enterprises, hitting logistics, targeting the most important defense factories and complexes, attacking Russian aviation and striking the Russian fleet. All of this is to disrupt the enemy's plans for an offensive. It's interesting. Who will be blamed other than General Gerasimov, who is so eager to continue this bloody mess?
Sasha, are we right in understanding that for Putin, stopping the war is akin to death? Moreover, even Trump made a statement that Putin will not meet with Zelensky. Gerasimov made a statement that the so-called special military operation is continuing. In other words, the war continues. And here's the question, is that really the case? Do we understand that at this point, nothing and no one can stop Putin? Because the US is simply incapable of doing so.
This is a very, broad issue. Because, look, what does it mean that no one can stop him? First of all, Putin has already been stopped. He can't conquer all of Ukraine. Right now, he's bargaining with Trump and basically selling hot air. He says, I won't try to conquer all of Ukraine, seize Kyiv, or change the government. But in return, please give me something. Let me have the remaining kilometers, thousands of square kilometers of Ukrainian Donbass, and freeze the war. This is his request. This is Putin's ultimatum-like approach. But this ultimatum keeps shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. He used to have completely different plans, Napoleonic plans. So what happened? That's why saying that Putin can't be stopped is wrong. He's already been stopped. He's being stopped by the Ukrainian army, by Ukrainian special services, and even by his own economy. He's being stopped by Western sanctions. He's also being held back to some extent by the arms race with Europe and the US that has begun, and we can't ignore that. Trump isn't stopping him, unfortunately, at the moment. We don't know how things will turn out. Now I'll go after everyone together with Putin. Or maybe he'll say, I'll try again and get it next year. We don't know. But it's obvious that the Americans will keep helping anyway. Yes, that's the current administration. This administration will change. Congress will change, maybe not in terms of a Republican majority. We don't know how the elections will go, but they're coming up very soon. When the elections happen, it's clear that the American voter will want some help making up their mind. And the American voter, whether Democrat or even Republican, for the most part, supports Ukraine, supports the armed forces of Ukraine, and stands against Russia, against Putin, and against his regime and his army. This means that, in principle, even Trump will have to play along and help Ukraine for at least some period of time, at least for half a year during the elections, before the elections, and so on. This essentially means that other forces will also get involved and will, in some way, pay more attention to Ukraine. Therefore, to say that Ukraine will fall out of focus is a mistaken judgment. Those are the words of people who do not understand and are not familiar with American domestic politics.
An important question. What will be happening at all the negotiation platforms?
Look, it seems to me that some very important decisions will be made regarding the war, about discussing what to do next with Trump, with the Americans, what the party line is, the general party line, so to speak. It's important that Zelensky, as far as I understand, has sent a secret signal to the Chinese, to Xi Jinping, and that there are some significant matters that most likely will also be discussed there. I'm sure that the American administration, through Trump and his representatives, has also sent some important signals to Xi and so on. There are Modi and others who are probably very much irritated by Trump's tariffs, who is not satisfied with receiving only $18 billion in discounted oil from Russia, while he is already losing $50 billion or however much it is. This is not profitable for him. Perhaps we will see a gradual split in this whole SCO system, in the entire BRICS system. Perhaps we will see India turning toward the West, moving away from Putin, moving away from China. Or perhaps we won't see this at all, and instead we'll witness a completely different process. We will understand and realize a lot of things. After some time, it will immediately become clear what preparations are being made. This axis, which is called the axis of evil, believe me, 2.0. I think that China will not abandon its plans to destabilize and, in principle, to stir up the situation in the world. Globally, I am certain that China will do everything possible. Circumstances so that the Americans get bogged down in Europe, get stuck in the Middle East, so that Russia can escalate the war against Ukraine and against Europe as a whole, to use the Lukashenko factor, to use the factor of Russian troops in Belarus, to constantly threaten NATO's eastern flank. I am certain that the Chinese will support Iran and its ambitions to destroy the Israelis. And basically, the destabilization of the Middle East as such, in order to move American forces and resources there, to these regions, both to Europe and to the Middle East, so that later they can seize Taiwan. A lot is about to be decided right now. By the way, I'll say it straight away. I honestly believe that a war between China and Taiwan is not far off. Next year, the beginning of 27, it's not far off. This process that has been set in motion, it seems to me, is inevitable, that it's already been decided. There, in China, in Beijing, with its inner circle. But anything is possible. You see, politics is, after all, the history of what is possible. That's why it seems to me that a lot is going to be decided right now. But that doesn't mean that just because they decide something, something will change globally. They've made decisions many times before. There were Olympic agreements before the start of the full-scale invasion during the Olympic Games in Beijing between Xi and Putin. Putin promised a blitzkrieg, it failed. Nothing worked out. There were other agreements. There were agreements through Beijing with North Korea. Did anything come out of that? Nothing worthwhile came out of it. There were other agreements. My God, China is helping Putin build, as far as we understand now, these new modernized Geran drones. Literally today, they found Chinese parts and a Chinese camera, a webcam, in them. Moreover, we know that China is helping Putin build, on the territory of Khabarovsk Krai, an entire enterprise, a drone factory for producing a huge number of drones. In other words, China is involved in the war. China is sending machines, sending chips to Putin, various components, helping Putin build missiles. I think it will help Putin restore his aviation. Strategic aviation eventually, not right now. But nevertheless, Dasha, he is helping. And the question is, what will restrain not Putin, but what will restrain China? What should be the terms of negotiations and what should Trump negotiate about and Xi? In order, basically, to put an end to this whole bloody mess and not give the world a chance to plunge into World War III? These are the key questions. We will also find out where the world will end up in the next 6 months.
X just wrote that Trump is ready to step away from the war because once again he made a statement during his last interview at the White House, quote, "Kids are playing war in the sandbox, let them fight a little longer." So, in this way, Trump is saying that he will most likely withdraw from the negotiation process. Simply because he can't put pressure on Putin, he can't put pressure on Russia, he's not capable of it. And that's why he says, let the war go on, using this terrible language, comparing war to a sandbox. Of course, these horrifying comparisons, what do you think?
I don't pay attention to Trump or his rhetoric. Trump keeps making mistake after mistake. Just notice, today he attacked the CIA. They declassified one of the Central Intelligence Agency employees who was working on Russia. You see, he shouldn't have been declassified since he was secretly working somewhere, was somehow working against Russia, against Putin, against the Putin regime. This is essentially a continuation of Trump's war with the CIA. It's unclear what this will lead to. And honestly, I don't care what he says. Frankly, right now, whatever Donald Trump says, it still helps Vladimir Putin because we don't see any concrete actions being taken. We don't see any approval for ATACMS. We don't see any approval for Storm Shadow. They're sending some new missiles, but their range is minimal. The range is very short. To say that they will allow strikes deep into Russia to destroy both Moscow and St. Petersburg and to carry out attacks as far as the Urals? No, absolutely not. And the idea that these missiles will arrive immediately is also not true. It will take years. All of this has already been said by military experts whose reports and viewpoints are available to review. So listen, he says something. Putin acts, Putin strikes. Trump is not blind. His administration is not blind. To say that they are idiots and don't understand anything is wrong. They understand everything perfectly well. Obviously, or let's say probably, Trump doesn't have a plan B. What else can be done? After Anchorage, where he messed up and failed with his plan to resolve the situation, everything started going wrong. I'm sure that the recent meetings, even with Ukrainian representatives on US soil, I mean the meetings with Yermak and Umerov, with Witkov as well, also demonstrated that, first of all, Witkov didn't quite understand everything correctly. Secondly, that Witkov once again gave in to some absolutely bizarre persuasions from Putin, and they turned out to be untrue and mistranslated. Because as always, Witkov showed up to meet Putin without a translator and without a State Department representative. I have only one question. Does Witkov actually speak Russian well? Is he even allowed to have a one-on-one conversation with Putin? Who was translating, supposedly? Kirill, Dmitriev, Lavrov? I don't think so. What is actually going on there? Behind closed doors, you mean? But I think the Ukrainian delegation made it very clear and outlined the red lines once again. Moreover, it seems to me that this time Europe, this European G7 together with Zelensky, showed Trump that the answer is no. European security issues will be decided with Europe at the table, not without Europe, at that very same table. I don't believe in this story about a three-way meeting between Putin, Zelensky, and Trump. Putin met with Trump once. He doesn't need to do it again. He won't meet with Trump in a three-way, a two-way, or any other format. He met with Trump once, that was in Finland, and once at the G20 summit. But that was just a brief encounter, not an official meeting or anything like that. That was enough for him back then. He won't meet with Trump anymore. He has nothing to talk about with Trump. It's important for him to outsmart Trump, and for this manipulation, this stringing along, to go on for many years. That's what matters to him, to drag out the process and keep fighting. And what's going on in his head? As for Trump, he doesn't care at all.
So, what Trump announced, a trilateral meeting between Ukraine, the US, and Russia, and they even named possible locations: Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Switzerland. You consider this scenario unrealistic?
I believe none of this will happen. Look, those same countries have already been involved before, even in a broader format, right? They offered it to us, put it on the table, a different list of countries, a more expanded format. Before the meeting, the supposed meeting between Putin and Zelensky, Trump promised, he called Putin, said, yes, the meeting will happen. Putin gave his approval, and we immediately started organizing everything. And then, when he realized that nothing was working out and Russia refused everything and said they would continue anyway, the Istanbul format, they said, we're raising the level of the delegation, but then they just decided to forget about it and didn't raise anything at all. The same Medinsky, so to speak, who isn't needed by anyone here. So this has already happened. We've already seen it and we've already heard it. Trump is now saying that he will end the war, not the war itself, but the situation around Gaza in the next 3 weeks. There are only about 2 weeks left now. Do you believe he will end it? Is that even being considered over there? No. He just realized that he can't keep bringing up the issue of Ukraine and this war so often. In the information space, it's become a joke at this point. So for now, he's temporarily switched his focus to Gaza. But in both cases, it's unrealistic. It's absolutely impossible to do anything because in order to achieve something, you have to punish the regime very harshly. The Iranian regime and the Putin regime. And I'm not sure Trump is ready for that. By the way, we saw this with Iran as well, with those bombings, when they quickly carried out the strikes but didn't want to completely destroy everything, eliminate or change the regime. And now we've seen the same thing with the situation with Putin. Again, 2 weeks, again 2 weeks, again 2 weeks, and the bombing goes on. Although he would probably like to go see Kim Jong-un again, he would surely like to meet with Putin again, and probably with Lukashenko too, so that he is once more deeply respected, as if being respected a little isn't enough, as if, in principle, Lukashenko is also not respected enough. But, I mean, the appeal, but you see, Dasha, over these years of rule, since 2016 or 2017, when Trump first came to power, and then 10 years later, during Biden's term, and now with Trump's second term, the fact that China is gathering all this around itself, that Indians are coming there, that other representatives are coming as well, and that America can no longer influence everyone, and the sanctions, American sanctions, tariffs, very often people treat them with indifference, especially within the specific alliances forming around China. This symbolizes only one thing, that this policy, which Trump is pursuing, and which Biden pursued before him, and all the others as well, is a policy that does not contribute to resolving situations or wars, but on the contrary, only fuels the power of countries like China. Unfortunately.
Friends, please like this video and leave a comment. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine's armed forces, our partnership. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from. Top analyst Alexander Devchenko.
See you next time. Bye.
Regarding yesterday's events, well, all the assessments were actually given by Foreign Minister Lavrov and his colleague. Ushakov also explained in what context this topic was raised. This refers to the attempted strike on the president and the president of the Novgorod region. Indeed, this is a terrorist act aimed at disrupting the negotiation process. It is directed not only personally against President Putin, and here I would like to I want to remind you of Zelensky's Christmas address, the words he spoke to Putin. but it is also directed against Trump. It is aimed at undermining President Trump's efforts to promote a peaceful resolution to the Ukrainian conflict, such a complex conflict. But the presidents maintain a relationship of trust in their dialogue and continue their discussions, and such provocations, such acts of state terrorism are not capable of undermining this level of trustful dialogue between the two presidents. You know that the diplomatic consequences of these actions by the regime will result in a tougher negotiating stance from the Russian Federation. As for the military consequences, our military knows how, with what, and when to respond. This was also mentioned yesterday.
Tell me, please, are there, let's say, any material pieces of evidence along the route of this attack on the presidential residence, and does Russia intend to present them? Could it be the wreckage of the drones that were shot down?
I don't think there should be any evidence here. If such a massive drone raid is carried out, and thanks to the well-coordinated work of the air defense, they were shot down and neutralized. But as for the wreckage, I can't say. This is more likely. Naturally, this is a matter for our military.
I know, and we see that even Zelensky himself is trying to deny it, and many Western media outlets playing along with the Kyiv regime are starting to push the narrative that supposedly this never happened. But that's a completely insane claim.
Well, and of course, Article 19, because some people say, come on, what's the big deal? It seems like nothing really happened, nothing terrible. It's a clause in Article 19 that in our new doctrine defines the conditions for the use of nuclear weapons. It is clearly stated here that an enemy's impact on critically important state or military facilities, and the presidential state residence falls under this category, the disabling of which would lead to the disruption of the nuclear force's retaliatory actions. We fully understand that the inability to use or enter the codes, or, you know, as people commonly say, the nuclear briefcase, Americans call it the football, the suitcase with the codes and systems that make it possible to act. This is a direct threat to NATO.
Military experts say that the main goal of the Kyiv regime's provocation is to disrupt peace initiatives. What targets might Moscow choose for a retaliatory strike?
If we talk about a response to a massive Ukrainian strike on the Russian president's residence, thank you. Of course, these could be decision-making centers, in this case, the residence. That means Bankova Street, the Ministry of Defense building, the main intelligence directorate, and a number of government institutions, as well as sites that have previously been attacked. I mean, the list of such targets. First and foremost, these are energy facilities and sites of the military-industrial complex. But in any case, this strike was intended to provoke Russia into taking disproportionate actions. That is the main goal of this provocation. And also to show that Ukraine has no intention of holding peace talks with Russia. So that is the main purpose of this strike. In other words, this is essentially the Kyiv regime's response to the Russian president's peace initiatives. Well,
the strike could be very powerful and very effective. We have never carried out strikes on the government residence against the Ukrainian president or the primary government buildings, specifically the Verkhovna Rada, the Ministry of Defense, the Security Service, or the main intelligence directorate. I truly think that now, at this very moment, it is entirely possible to strike these critical targets.
Now to the details of the terrorist attack.
It can be understood that this attempt was aimed not only at eliminating our president, our supreme commander-in-chief. The calculation was simple. By eliminating Putin, we would be searching for someone to replace him. That means time lost, the breakdown of all negotiations, everything comes to a halt. The pace of the offensive would stop, and ultimately, we would be forced into a humiliating defeat. What should we do? We should do the same as Netanyahu. Use everything. We need Oreshnik. Use Oreshnik. We need to use Poseidon. It doesn't matter who supplied weapons to those freaks, those scumbags. Britain, Germany, it doesn't matter who. This is a direct war, and someone needs to be held accountable for it. An attack from Kyiv means that Ukraine has officially declared war on the Russian Federation. That is exactly how international law interprets this situation. As for Russia's retaliatory measures, I firmly believe that the most optimal and effective option would be to precisely strike Zelensky's official residence, as well as other crucial centers of state and military command located within Kyiv, utilizing a powerful medium-range ballistic missile, specifically the Oreshnik in its non-nuclear configuration, to achieve the desired objective.